going, everyone? It's Bales, and welcome back to another episode of AFL Fantasy Head to Head. So, episode 2, we had the episode yesterday with Liam from Free Kick. So, if you haven't checked that, make sure you do. But we've got another guest on today, Lewy from PODPOD and Coaches Panel. Lewy, mate, how you going?
Good, thanks, mate. It's good to be here. How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. I'm really interested to talk about two certain players from a club that you support. They're going to be in the mix for a lot of people's pretty much anywhere from F2 to F5, depending on how stacked people's forward lines are going to be this season. We're talking about Connor, Rozee, and Zak Butters. So both fantasy relevant heading into this fantasy season, Lewy.
Yeah, they are, mate. And they're only got about, 10, 15K price between them. And these two obviously drafted in the same year have been arm wrestling a little bit for who's not only the better fantasy scorer, but also the better footballer. And I think a lot of coaches, rightfully so, are pretty excited about what these two can do this year, coming into their own. They're about that age where they're ready to take the next step. And I think a lot of fantasy coaches are rightfully reading that one of them or even both of them are going to take that next step to being super, not only fantasy relevant, but also players that we may be selecting in our sides this year.
Yeah, 100%. But we're going head to head with this one. So we're going to see which player we'll pick. But first off, we'll start with Connor Rozee. So, Lewy, mate, why should people be looking at Connor Rozee ahead of the 2023 season?
Well, there's a big reason why, Bales, and as a lot of the fantasy coaches and people out there podcasting will tell you, you always look towards the end of last year and what players are able to do, because it's often a sign of things to come, because the shackles come off and coaches try different things, and when they work, they tend to sort of parlay them into the preseason and then into the season coming afterwards. And Connor Rozee is an interesting one. He comes in with baked-in value because of how he started the 2022 season. So he was camped up forward. He was probably a little bit underdone, not in great form. And across those first 4 weeks, only recorded a 21, 48, a 54, and a 55. So he averaged the 45, which straight away makes you want to throw up in your mouth a little bit. But in round 5, at halftime, the coaches decided to swing the magnets around, and that's when Connor Rozee found himself in that midfield rotation. He notched up a 113, his first ton for the year, and he kind of went on from there, and that's why we're talking about him today, because from that point on, he started attending centre bounces. He brought up his average CBAs for the year up to 50%, and his scoring followed suit. So in his last 5 games, in his post-buy, he went at 102, which is in stark contrast to how he started the year. And when he went 60% CBAs, he also went at 95 AFL fantasy points. So we know that when he does have the role, he's able to score. And just talking about it on the coaches panel just the other day, he's one of those players that's able to fill every single stat line. So he's not one that you have to entirely rely on him to find outside ball like marks and kicks. He's actually well in and under as well, too, getting the tackles, hitting the scoreboard, and being that sort of hybrid forward mid type that the AFL tends to be turning to at the moment.
Yeah. Were you surprised that he ended up keeping forward status, because he was in their bulk CBAs for pretty much 2/3 of the season?
Yeah, I was, mate. He must have been very close to losing it. But do you know what? Him having forward status is a bit of a blessing for us this year.
Yeah.
Amongst the options that we do have, I think coaches aren't stressing so much about their forward line options as much as which one do they pick, because there's probably about 4 or 5 blokes in there that you could throw a blanket over on your starting sides.
Yeah, no, there's so many options this year. It's unlike many other years. I think a lot of people at the end of last year were probably thinking we're not going to have that many options in the forward line, because we expected Bailey Smith and Bonampelli and Parker, and we thought Cornelio and Rozee were going to be 2 others that would lose it, but they kept it. Dunkley might have lost it as well, but they've all kept it. But the other thing I want to talk about Rozee as well is that he's arguably, well, he probably is Port's best player now, and he's their best midfielder and most damaging player. Do you expect more attention going to him? And if so, do do you expect his scoring to suffer, or do you think he did show in a game or two last year where he was able to break break the shackles of a tag?
Look, I do expect attention to come. He did win the best and fairest, so coaches will be taking note of that, and he'll be circled to be someone that they do need to sort of keep a hold of, so he doesn't get too far off the leash. But that being said, we're not too sure how competitive Port will be as well. So depending on how they perform, it might be something that coaches are happy to let sort of fall by the wayside. But I wouldn't be too worried about it. I think he's got that ability to sort of push outside of the midfield and find other ways to score, even if it is up forward. And he's probably alongside the guy we're going to be talking about today. He's probably one of the midfielders that Port has that just brings something different in that midfield mix. So I'm pretty confident that he's going to be someone who is attending, 60+% CBAs more weeks than not.
Yeah, and I was exactly going to ask you that. Yeah, what do you expect is CBAs? But yeah, so he'll be one of the main guys in there. And another one of the guys that be in there a fair bit this year, I'd imagine, be Zak Butters. So he's only the 16K less than Connor Rozee. So there's really not much difference in terms of price. So you can really look at either. But with Zak Butters, we pretty much know his story last year. Pretty frustrating for a lot of people. So he started really, really well with that big 137 against Hawthorn in round 2, and he got the 96 against Brisbane in round 1, which was good. But then the 59 against Adelaide was quite quiet, and then had a bit of an up and down roll. Had the 34 against West Coast, where I'm pretty sure from memory, Lou, was he crook that day, or did he get injured or something? Or
yeah, I can't remember, mate, but it's seriously uncharacteristic from a player as good as Zak Butters to be putting up a 33, and you'd be pretty confident just about every single week he'll be doubling that.
Yeah, no, I definitely imagine
he
does. 100%. But yeah, he, I think from memory that game he sat forward. Then he had a few like just 90 scores. Didn't hit 100 until the back half of the year in round 20 when he actually finished the year with 400. So he did have that interrupted middle where I think he got injured against Richmond with that big hit with, I think it was Tom Jonas from memory. And then he missed a couple of games and was just sort of in and out. And then he really finished the year off well with 99, 72, 83, 103, 116, 114, and 121. So in his last 7 games, he went on to average 101.1, in AFL fantasy there. So really did finish like a house on fire. And again, that middle of the year, those low scores are baked into his price. Very similar to Rozee, where they're a lot cheaper than what they're going to produce this year. So both of them are underpriced. I think Butters is probably not going to have the same amount of CBAs as Rozee. I think Rozee will probably have the more, but I think Butters is going to be right there. I think we heard from, the indications we got from Port's coach. So you can probably speak more about this, Louis, but it looks like they're going to be going for more of a younger midfield, maybe both playing a bit more forward, but like Horn Francis in the mix now as well with Butters and Rozee. How do you see the CBA mix being this season?
Yeah, like I said, I think Port do have a lot of the same type of mids, the big bullocking sort of pressure midfielders, and Butters and Rozee do bring something different in that mix. So I think that we can expect just about every single centre bounce, at least one of those will be attending it. And I think that's going to equate to probably about minimum 50% CBAs for both of those players. And it may be an arm wrestle some weeks depending on what's working, but I do agree with you, Bailey. I think Butters is probably just slightly behind on CBAs. And just because Connor Rozee has shown a little bit more to this point, obviously won the BNF. He's going to have a bit of swagger about him. The confidence will be there. And not only himself, but the coaches to swing him in there and get a job done. So I expect those two to always be in there accompanying probably Wines and a JHF. And then I think Drew will go through there quite a bit as well.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And those sorts of players, they'll be the protectors for them to be able to get the ball out to them. And yeah.
Yeah, well, speaking of protecting players, though, Zak Butters certainly doesn't protect himself in some games. He certainly goes in just as hard as thinks he's like 6'4", which I do admire him for going in half of the ball, but it can be a bit of a headache for us fantasy managers. We have seen him of a few games where he was injured during the game. So the West Coast game, again, we can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it was an injury or he was sick or whatever. But then he had the injury against Richmond. And then from memory, I think he did get injured against Sydney as well when he got a 44 and ran 40 because he missed 2 weeks after that. So we have seen him get injured during the game. Is that a bit of a worry with Butters heading into the season, Louis?
It is a little bit, mate, just because he's been in the system 4 years now. He's never put together a full season. And look, some of the injuries have been a little bit unlucky, but you're right. He doesn't help himself either, just with the way that he attacks the ball. And look, you love to see it as a football fan, but when you're a fantasy coach and maybe you're owning him, you do have your heart in your mouth a little bit, because we do know how valuable trades are in this game. And if you get a little bit behind, maybe you get a red dot or an injury somewhere else, and then Butters is stacked up on top of that, then quite quickly you can get a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I guess the downside with him getting injured, it's normally during a game as well. So at least if, like, for example, one of the Geelong guys, like a Duncan or Stewart's like a late out because they're getting rested or they got like a slight niggle, at least you can trade them to someone to get another player that's going to come in and hopefully score at a premium level. Whereas if you get a Butters and he gets injured normally mid-game, he only gives you like 30, 40, 50, 60, like a pretty low score. So that is a little bit of a concern there. Do you have any other concerns heading into the season, or anything like positive with Butters heading into the season you want to touch on?
Look, I think what's really positive with Butters is the way he came home. He went at that 107 average in his last 5, and he did that from just 36% CBA. So you have to think that with added responsibility, potentially in 2023, if he can bump those numbers up past 50%, there's already a little bit of baked in value if he can piece it together. So I do like looking at the upside from that. He's a player that has shown that ability to score elsewhere, and he does have quite a good outside game, despite how good he is when he is in the contest.
Yeah. No, both these players are going to be highly talked about, especially, well, I know Rozee's been the one that's talked about more, but that's moving on to really the head-to-head. So, Louis, who would you be picking out of these two if you could only pick one heading into this season?
Look, it's going to be close, Bales, and I think you could probably flip a coin on how these guys are going to go. There's a lot of circumstances that could change it, but at this stage, I do have to favour Connor Rozee and that's just because I've got more confidence in him having more mid-minutes. I'm a bit more confident in his role. I'm a little bit more confident in his body as well. He does cop it a little bit for being injury prone, but then I look back at what he's done previously, and he's put together 2 full seasons, Connor Rozee, out of his 4, and there was only really that 1 year where he wasn't able to get on the park as much as he'd like. But I think he's sort of coming into his own. I wouldn't say hitting his prime yet, but he's certainly starting to edge towards that. And I think that he's one that I can be pretty confident is going to take that next step and be close enough to a top 6 forward for us to start in our sides and be a keeper for the rest of the year. Whereas Butters, I think he'll be around that mark as well. But like you said, the style of his football doesn't really lend itself to playing 22 games. And I'm not sure it ever will either. That's the sort of player that he is. He brings that tenacity. He brings that pressure to the contest. And look, you don't want to coach or train that sort of thing out of him. And I think that might be something that we have to deal with at times. But it's probably, in a way, makes him a little bit more relevant too, because if he does get one of those injured games on a 30 Bales and comes down a little bit over a number of weeks, then all of a sudden you can pick this guy up pretty cheap and be fairly confident that he's someone that can be thereabouts top 6 forward to sort of take you through to the end of the year and just hope that he can still stay on the park.
Yeah, no, agreed. I have to agree with everything you said. Yeah, I'd be picking Connor Rozee out of the two. I think we have spoken, it's been spoken about in all the podcasts, where you want to start the year off with a pretty vanilla side, because you're trading throughout the year. It's going to get you, it's going to help with your ranking a lot more. And I just think that with Rozee at the start, I think you mentioned that Butters could have an injury mid-game and then come down in price, which means we can get him cheaper. And I think Rozee's the one that could really get away from the competition if you don't start with him. He could be a guy that rises really quickly in price, puts up a 105, 110 average, or maybe more in the first 5 or 6 weeks. So, yeah, I'll be picking Connor Rozee out of the two, plus as well, just the injury risk as well. You want to start off with players a bit more safer. But moving on to that, have you got either of these guys in your side, or have you got both in your side, or maybe none? What are you looking at heading into the
Zak
season?
Butters, he hasn't spent any time in my side this preseason, but Connor Rozee comes in and he comes out. Like I said earlier on in the podcast, there is about 4 to 5 to 6 forwards that I'd be pretty confident in starting this year. And depending on how funds work, every now and then he comes back in to make a bit of change. And sometimes he goes back out when I do find a bit of extra dollars too. But I think he will be someone that I start, not only because I like him as a fantasy prospect, but you do sort of have that natural bias. Obviously, being a Port supporter myself, and I think it's always important to pick players that you enjoy watching. And not that I don't enjoy watching Butters, but I think Rosee's a superstar to watch, and there is a little bit of safety in numbers at this point too, with his ownership percentage. You could make a case to take him on, but I probably wouldn't be taking him on with Zak Butters, because I don't think Zak Butters in comparison to Connor Rozee is going to make that much more of a difference for you.
Yeah, I guess if you took him on with like a Canelio or something like that, or
Yeah,
one of the guys
exactly.
there,
Yeah,
that could be something you could do. But yeah, the Butters one, I wouldn't take on. You probably want just Rozee, or you could have both. But at the moment, I don't have currently any. So we're continuing the thing from yesterday. I didn't have any of those two. Don't have any of these two. But Rozee has been in for large portions. He was I think only took him out a couple of days ago, but I'll probably will start with him. I just think he's quite valuable, being underpriced based on what he did. And it wasn't just like a 5 or 6 game stretch at the end of the year. It was a big portion.
It was pretty much a full season. Yeah. You take out those 4 weeks, and he went at 98 or something like that. So immediately when you come in priced at 88, you can sort of point towards that 10 points upside. And look, worst case scenario, maybe he doesn't get there, but I don't see him falling below that 88. So in terms of a starting pick, I think there's a really low risk selection.
Yeah, and as we talk about, we're always hunting for value, and I think Connor Rozee is definitely value. And I think Butters is value as well if he can stay on the park for a full season, but that is just that little flag. So there you go. That's head-to-head. We picked Connor Rozee there. But beautiful. Thanks very much for jumping on, Lewy, mate. Where can the people find you on Twitter and across the social, and also wherever you jump on the podcasts?
Yeah, so you can find me at LewyAF on Twitter. On a couple of different podcasts, obviously the Point of Difference, the PODPOD is weekly with Statesman, Holmesy and Dossie. So always discussing plenty on that, as well as the coaches panel throughout the year. You'll hear from me as well. So make sure to get around them. Always talking plenty of fantasy there. So I think your listeners, they wouldn't be listening in if they weren't interested, mate. So yeah, get around it.
Yeah, no, definitely go and follow Lewy across socials, and also go follow PodPod and Coaches Panel wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for jumping on again, Lewy, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow for a couple of defenders that we'll be speaking about that are highly being talked about in the preseason. So we'll catch you guys then with another special guest. So we're out. Cheers.
Bye.